As we discussed in the last video, the whole point of the restructuring of Turkish state and society with the creation of the Republic was an orientation towards the West, towards Europe. It's trying to socially re-engineer society to make in the image of the West. And this process has made very large steps forward in the past 70 years, 80 years. So we see that Turkey stays neutral during World War II. It does not join the war on the side of the Axis powers, which could have been expected given the strong sympathies for Germany in the region at the time. It stays neutral, and after the Second World War, it is a strong supporter of the United States and is at the same time a strong recipient of United States support. So it is one of the original recipients of Marshall Plan 8 in 1948, and is therefore seen from the other side of the Atlantic, seen as an integral part of Western Europe. And it is here we see the poster of Marshall Plan 8, and through being a recipient of Marshall Plan 8, Turkey is also becoming a founding member of the OECD, which is, if you might know, basically a type of the club of the industrialized countries. Turkey for a long time remained something of an oddity in that organization, but is now a bona fide member and has by now built up an economy that would clearly justify its continued existence in it. And as you see in this map, it is a rather exclusive grouping of states in which Turkey is now a member. As you can see, it is an outlier in the region. None of its neighbors, with the exception of Greece, none of its Muslim neighbors has achieved access into the OECD. So Turkey is also a founding member of the Council of Europe, and which was founded in 1949, and through this membership it has also a founding signatory of the European Convention on Human Rights. And we all know that the Turkish human rights record is problematic, as evidenced by a multitude of cases at the Strasbourg Court on Human Rights. But again, needs to be remembered, it is the only Muslim country, of the region now, so with the post-Soviet period, we have some other Muslim countries that have joined, but it's the only that from the beginning was a member. And it has been a relatively good implementer of these decisions. And if you compare it, for example, with Iran or Saudi Arabia or Syria, its immediate neighbors, it is quite a different type of social arrangement that Turkey allows its citizens to take it to a supranational human rights court. It is, given the strong relationship to the United States, it is also not founding, but it's very soon in 1952, it joined NATO, was considered to be a very important member by the United States and the rest of the alliance because it secured the southern flank of Western Europe and held and bound quite significant Soviet troops in the bordering Turkey. So here on this map you see the membership of NATO. And it is also the membership in NATO that has made it a very attractive conduit for the Central Asian and Caucasus republics after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, because through the NATO Partnership for Peace program, these countries were drawn into the institutional orbit of NATO, and through NATO, because military integration is easier than economic and social integration, were brought closer to the existing stabilizing institutional arrangements that exist in Europe. And Turkey played a very important bridging role. It is also, as you can see here in a picture of a bust of Ataturk in Israel, it used to be for a long time the only Muslim nation that recognized the State of Israel. It has had good diplomatic relations since 1949 was the first Muslim country to recognize Israel, and relations have been both economically and militarily fairly cordial until rather recently with the unfortunate Gaza flotilla incident of 2010, and since then diplomatic relations have been somewhat downgraded and military cooperation has been suspended. But I think it's safe to say that this is just a passing irritant. It is quite likely that they will resume. Turkey has also been a very active military participant in Western alliance, both maneuvers, trainings, and also military engagements, as we see here. And this is Turkey is an important contributor to the international stabilization and assistance force in Afghanistan. Here you see Turkish troops advising Afghan policemen and training them. And being a Muslim nation working in the Muslim environment of Afghanistan, the Turkish contribution to ISAF has been very much welcomed by the rest of the alliance. As I said, Turkey has always tried to maintain good relations with the rest of the Muslim world. It is a founding member of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, used to be called the Organization of the Islamic Conference, has been a founding member since 1969. And here, as you see on this map, Turkey is in, if you want to put it that way, in its natural habitat. It is surrounded by other Muslim nations, so this is a much more natural grouping for Turkey. It is less exposed than it was in the OECD thing. And it does play a very active role also in this organization. As I mentioned, the relations between the United States of America and Turkey have, ever since the Second World War, been very, very good. And it is the United States that, for its own strategic reasons, has been an extremely strong supporter of Turkish membership in the European Union. You see here a newspaper clipping of President Obama joining the uninterrupted ranks of all his predecessors that have likewise urged the European Union to admit Turkey as a full member. And we will come to some of the problems with that position in a minute. But just keep it in mind that it's particularly the United States and some of its more Atlanticist-looking allies in Europe that have likewise pushed for European membership of Turkey. One of the reasons made by these Atlanticist supporters of Turkish membership in the European Union is the potential bridging function that Turkey could play and has played in the military sector, and arguably could also play in the social and economic sector. And the argument is always made that Turkey's strong economic and social performance, its vibrant democracy, could serve as a model and help to reduce the tensions between the so-called Western model and much of the Muslim world. And this is one of the issues that we will come back to as the course progresses. Let's talk for a few minutes about the EU accession process. This is obviously the big white elephant that is in the room whenever people talk about Turkey. It is geographically, yes, it has a relatively small stretch of European territory, but it is by and large an Asian nation. It has an Asian history, but it is also obviously, and as we, if you remember 2 videos back, it has had throughout its history a very strong engagement with Europe. However, that engagement used to be rather negative. It was an antagonistic relationship. So the question now is whether Turkey could or should join the European Union. Formally, the decision has been taken on the side of both parts. There have been accession agreements in place for a long time. Negotiations have been going on for literally decades. But it is, as you can see from the length of the proceedings, it has not been an altogether simple process. The Council decision from 2008 lays down the expectations particularly from the European Union towards Turkey, and the conditions that Turkey has to fulfill in order to achieve full membership. And we will go into this now a little bit, what this entails. The first thing, and that is probably the most problematic, the most difficult thing for any candidate country, is to use the technical term, the acquis communautaire, the existing collection, the comprehensive body of European law that is now in existence and that have to be accepted and implemented in toto by any new member. And the acquis communautaire consists of the legislation, the legal acts, the court decisions that together in their entirety constitute the body of European law. And as you can imagine, after now more than a half century of European integration, this is a very comprehensive, extremely detailed and very, very demanding set of requirements that is now being imposed on a new candidate state. And the implementation of this very vast body of law, and as you see in the present slide, the consolidated treaties now, this is a very heavy book now. And apart from just the treaties, you have the rest of the legal materials that are binding. And these are negotiated in 35 chapters with each of the candidate states. And Turkish negotiations on these 35 chapters have proven to be much more demanding than, for example, with Iceland or Croatia that just joined. And we will see in a minute why these negotiations continue to be so difficult. One of the other requirements for membership, apart simply from implementing the acquis in the legal sense, the existing laws that exist, are what the European Union in its 1993 European Council formally expressed and formally put out. They're called the Copenhagen criteria, because the European Council was held in Copenhagen at the time. And they set out, and were at that time directed both towards Central and Eastern Europe, but also at Turkey already at the time, setting out the path for membership for the new countries that have emerged from the post-Soviet space. And it's a set of institutional arrangements that the European Union, both for practical but especially for normative reasons, considers to be indispensable. These are the candidate states is supposed to have achieved a stability of institutions that guarantee democracy. Democracy is the first normative achievement, and institutions that guarantee it. The rule of law, human rights, respect and protection for minorities, and we will see that this is a problem in the Turkish context. The existence of a functioning market economy, which, as we see, this is one of the things that Kemalism in its traditional iteration was not necessarily committed to. So there have been significant changes in the economy of Turkey in response to that requirement of a functioning market economy based on private enterprise, as well as the capacity to cope with competitive pressure and market forces within the European Union. As you know, the whole idea of the European Union is the creation of a common market where no national protections and boundaries of commerce should exist. So Turkey and some of the other candidate countries were deemed not to have yet reached the stage of economic competitiveness to survive in that market. But as we will see at the end of this video, we might actually see a change here, because given the recent strength of the Turkish economy, it might now actually have reached a stage where it not only can cope, but thrive in this competitive market. Now, with respect to the EU accession process and the demands it has placed on Turkish state and society, we're dealing with a true dilemma, a paradox of the old Kemalist elite. As we heard in the last video, the whole point of the Kemalist ideology was the emulation of the West and the transformation of Turkish society to become like a normal European society. And in order to achieve this, they have created a number of tools, both the principles that we discussed and the reforms that they introduced and the institutional setup of the state that were meant to carry out this task of transforming a backward Oriental society into a modern, forward-looking society on a par and equal to the West. And some of the institutions that were created were tools in this transformation, and perhaps the most important is the armed forces, but there are others, the courts, the educational institutions. The entire state sees itself as governed by a clear mandate of transformation. Now, what we see is that this club of Western nations that this society wants to join has now developed, and it's imposing conditions of membership that require the Turkish state to actually dismantle part of this tool set that they have created for this. So you see the certain paradox that exists within the Kemalist elite, perhaps the most important of which is the armed forces. And for us now, it's important to point out that in the process of ongoing accession negotiations, Turkey has, as with the other candidates, it's in anticipatory adaptation to the institutional, legal, social, and economic acquis, the existing body of rules in the European Union, has in anticipation has already started to change quite significantly its own institutional setup. And this change has now opened the political space for political movements that were inconceivable 30 years ago, and that to whom the Kemalist elite, still bound to the 6 principles, is very much antagonistic. And this is something that the outside world watches carefully. Of how is the military going to react? And we see back, nobody expects an open coup again, but as we saw in 2007, the military still is making demands and make them felt to the Islamists in power. So understanding this paradox, this dilemma that exists both for the Kemalist elite and for the Turkish state and society in general, helps us to go a long way in understanding the current upheavals, the protests that are unfolding in Turkey right now between the socially conservative, economically liberal, Islamically oriented party that has benefited from the opening of the political space under the aspiration of EU membership, and the old Kemalist elite that is still wedded to the integrity of the principles and does not want to see the old institutional arrangements that has characterized the Turkish Republic for so long, seeing them dismantled. So for Turkey's accession into the European Union, there remain a number of contentious issues. One we already mentioned is the civilian control of the armed forces. That is a big issue, but it is in the process of being resolved, but raising new issues, as we have seen. The other are minority rights, their participation rights, their cultural rights, the way of their ability and to speak their own languages, to teach in their own languages. We have seen great strides towards this, but this is likely to cause to yield new tensions, and whether the Turkish state is able to deal with these tensions in a constructive manner is one of the points of that will decide whether this process is favorable. The other issue is immigration and free movement, and the period that will, the grace period, if you want to call it this way, in which immigration from Turkey will be delayed into Western Europe. You already have a very, very sizable Turkish minority in many of the Western European nations. They're generally distinct. The question is now how well assimilated or integrated they are, but they resist assimilation, and the Turkish government has been very active in treating them as foreign citizens. And so there is a fear that if these numbers rise more, that they will cause more social problems in the host nations. So these are issues that remain conscientious, particularly with Turkey. But one other is the fear, some of these issues also arise with member states that now are already members. Bulgaria, Romania, they have raised similar problems. However, they are much smaller than Turkey. If you look at the map here, it's both geographically, Turkey is a very large country, and it is geographically rather distant from the rest of Europe, as we see here. But as the next graph shows, it's already now, Turkey would be the second largest member state after Germany. And given the much higher birth rate in Turkey, as opposed to the rest of Europe, where populations are actually shrinking, we can assume that by the time Turkey would actually become a member, or shortly thereafter, Turkey would be the biggest member state, with all that follows this in voting power in the parliament and in the council and in the other institutions. So this is and remains it causes certain fears among the existing members of the Union. The other is that if you look at this graph that we already shown earlier on, GDP per capita in Turkey has risen dramatically in the last 15 years. However, it remains still much lower than in the rest of Europe. If that rate of growth continues, this problem will probably solve itself. Then it's no longer that a very large and very poor country is joining the Union. And as we see in this graph, GDP has been, the GDP growth overall has been very, very fluctuating, but overall much higher than in the rest of the Union. It is perhaps more in the social or ideological, if you want to call it this sense, where particular fears exist. And it needs to be said that, and that is the question now, is Turkey simply too big, too poor, too different? Or is this just a euphemism for it is too Muslim? And that's exactly how Turks perceive this debate in Europe, that they are being singled out due to their religious aspect. However, and this is a problem, and we will come back to this in the course of our journey here together, because it also affects other countries. With respect to Turkey, however, there is an issue with the extreme nationalism, and we've seen that the nationalism was consciously created in the Turkish Republic and served generally positive social aims. There are, however, questions whether it might now have reached a stage where it is at odds with the general social consensus in the other member states. If you look at this extract from the website of the Turkish Armed Forces, they have a specific section, it's called Historical Issues, that deals with the Armenian issue. And basically where Turkey refuses to acknowledge that things happened there in the course of the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, for which Turkey as a nation, as a state, should take responsibility. It is quite possible to come to a new definition of your national history and your national identity. And therefore, if we acknowledge the power and the reasoning for the Turkish nationalism as it developed in the 20th century, it is not inconceivable that a new form of nationalism can be found that is perhaps more amenable to its neighbors, including some of which are now members of the European Union and in all likelihood would pose problems to accession. And this concludes our session on Turkey and Central Asia, and we will return to some parts of Central Asia when we talk about Iran. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can now put the Turkish debate into a little bit more of a historical context, and I look forward to seeing you next week.